So, like the other thing that happens, change happens as well. And what we want to be able to do as managers, though, is make change happen well and happen in the direction that is preferable as opposed to a decline or something that is disadvantageous. And so, we've got a few ideas that can help us. And the first of this is two metaphors that have been used to explain the ways in which change can happen. And this is specifically talking about preferred change and how we get to where we want to go. And so the first metaphor is what they call the calm waters metaphor. And we'll go into this a little bit more in the next slide. But this is a kind of older idea about change that comes from a time when business and life was a bit more stable. And so it was a bit more like just taking a large ship and then crossing the ocean. And you might experience a few occasional storms that flare up that you've got to sort of deal with. But generally speaking, you know, the direction is fairly clear, and we can just get wherever we're going through a coordinated effort. The whitewater rapids metaphor is a more recent one that tends to describe the more current environment. So I'll refer you to, I don't know if I've talked to you guys about the term VUCA before, which is a way of describing the modern world. It was actually introduced during the Second World War as a way to describe the Second World War and the way that war was happening. But it's become used as a way of describing the kind of modern world and in particular modern business. And so it's an acronym that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so, as you can imagine, in the music industry, this is particularly pertinent because the music industry is an environment that is quite complex, it's uncertainty, it's fairly volatile. There's a lot of change that happens all the time. So we can't use this metaphor of kind of just heading off across a calm sea and just navigating our way. We're more like a group of people in a small dinghy crashing through a raging river. And there's a quote in our book which is quite nice from someone who refers to the whitewater rapids metaphor as being like trying to lead a company in change in an industry in change. And I think that that's quite a good way of thinking about the music industry as well, that we're always trying to grow or lead our business to some form of success, but we're trying to do that in an environment that's quite complex and volatile. But our calm waters metaphor is also useful in terms of just thinking in terms of a broader framework of understanding any change that we're trying to make and deliver. And this is particularly the case if we are in an environment where people are used to stability, and having change kind of either forced upon them or expected of them can create some resistance. So this is Lewin's 3-step change process. And so it's, as you can see, there's this component here which he calls unfreezing. So if we think of this as an equilibrium state, so, you know, how we are right now, business as usual, whatever we're doing, people are just doing their thing, they're used to their jobs and they just get on with it. And then if we're trying to create some kind of change to move in a different direction and shift the way that people work, the way they think, the way that things are happening in the organization, we kind of need to disrupt this equilibrium state through a change process. But then we also need to go back to an equilibrium state, because otherwise we're just going to stay in chaos, and people are going to be uncertain of what is now expected of them. Things have changed, but what do we do now? So we sort of need to kind of re-stabilize things. And what they don't have in this diagram in the book, which is a bit odd, so I've added it in for us here, is this idea that when we're trying to create change, we have these restraining forces and driving forces. So restraining forces are the things that are trying to maintain our frozen equilibrium state, so business as usual. And then our driving forces are either the reasons or the kind of things that are trying to push us into this new direction. And so to give you an example of this, just as a model, and to sort of think about what does all these kind of terms mean, if we say we're at a state that probably most of us experience, where we either, we're feeling a bit sluggish, we want to get fit, we want to eat better. And so maybe we say we want to get fit. And so we have our kind of state as it is at the moment, which is our level of fitness, and we want to increase our level of fitness and feel healthier and more vibrant and maybe lose some weight or something like that. So our driving forces in wanting to create this change might be things like, that we want to feel healthier, we want to feel hotter, we want to have more energy, etc., etc. So these are the things that are kind of pulling us in a direction that we want to initiate this change to get fitter and eat better. Our restraining forces might be things like, we really like pizza and chocolate, and getting up early in the morning to exercise, or just exercising in general is like, oh, we're not really into it. Maybe we feel like we don't have enough time to do that sort of stuff. We're not feeling very motivated. And so these things we can think of the restraining forces that are kind of, or the reins that are kind of holding us back in terms of trying to induce or create this change. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of how this model works. And so if you're working with people as a manager, or you are being managed, having a bit of an awareness around, well, what is the resistance that's happening here? And what are these driving forces that are wanting to kind of move us in this direction? Being able to understand them will be able to help us in this unfreezing and change process. Also keeping in mind that while all that is happening, we're still in our whitewater raft. So there's a lot of dynamic things happening around the change that we're trying to create, that can then also become restraining forces, because it kind of, our energy and our ability to kind of be constantly trying to make that change happen is being kind of, all the other things are competing with that at the same time. And so we have this concept called organisational development, which is how organisations tend to try and implement plan changes. Now, this is more the case in large, very stable organisations. And typically what you'll have is someone who'll be either an organisational development person, like an actual role that normally sits in the HR department of a big corporate company. But in smaller organizations, this kind of role is usually either not specified or implicit in just the behaviors and what happens in the organizations, and normally falls onto managers and teams to kind of do themselves, either explicitly by knowing that this is what we should be doing, or often just intuitively, or not doing it at all, right? So not doing it at all often implies that it's not done well. And so our ability to affect positive change may be somewhat limited. And so the purpose of organisational development is actually about how do we cultivate the attitudes and values of people in the organisation in a way that helps foster these changes that we're wanting to make, and is also oriented towards increasing employee participation, so that they have some sense of ownership of the change that's being made, and the cultivation of trust, communication, and the team cohesion that is important to make good change happen as well. And so our book gives us a couple of options about how we can foster organisational development. The ways that they suggest are things like feedback. And so you might have noticed me in our classes doing this kind of informally, where I'll kind of check in with you guys and say, how are you going? Are you enjoying these lectures online? How are you coping in terms of your overall program of all your assignments and stuff like that you're trying to do? And this is me trying to tap into some feedback from you in an informal, not necessarily in a survey, because I can just ask you guys, as a way to kind of test how you're going, and how the changes that are being made and the changes that you're going through, because you're constantly learning and being challenged by new material, not just in this class, but in all your classes. I'm doing that to kind of assess where you're at and how are you going. The other option is, and you'll see this happen in big organizations, again, probably not as much in smaller organizations, is they'll bring in external consultants, so management consultants and things like this, and they'll do all this kind of assessment, so looking at your processes, analyzing communication, all this sort of stuff, and then they'll provide recommendations around how to actually either implement change or how to ready the team for any particular changes that are coming in. I have a friend whose job is a change manager, and that's what he does. That's his profession. He works with organizations to actually help them navigate change and bring in big changes. So that can also happen. And so if you're a manager in a smaller organization, this is something that you may need to do yourself. You need to be wearing this kind of hat around how do you tap into people's readiness to implement or to change in the direction that you're needing to go. We can also use things like team building. So this can help us build the cohesion and trust within a team, enhance those the positive relationships in the team, so that then when change happens, people are all kind of happy to move together. Obviously, if we think of our ship again, if we've got some people trying to sail a ship in the other direction to the way that, you know, others are trying to go, then it's not going to be a very coordinated effort, and it's going to be much harder to get in the direction that we're wanting to go. So having that cohesive team is quite important. And then we have this intergroup development. So again, where we're working with across multiple teams, helping them work together in order to maintain that cohesion as well. So change resistance. So back in when we were looking about our this little thing, our second step was looking at what approach might we take to helping people avoid or manage the resistance to change. And there's a few different reasons that people resist change. First of all is that it just makes things uncertain, right? Human beings tend to prefer certainty to uncertainty. We like to kind of deal with kind of having a sense of knowing where we're going and knowing what the outcomes will be. And so any change necessarily creates a bit of uncertainty. And so, you know, it's kind of the old cliche of the better the devil you know, that even if people kind of go, well, this isn't really working, or I'm not really happy with it, stepping into the unknown requires work and effort. So there's also that threshold of just increased effort that goes along with it. We also tend to do things out of habit, and so changing habits is needed in order to affect change. Fear of loss is a very common psychological principle. So humans are known to prefer. So there's studies that have been done that show that people would rather not. I'm trying to explain this properly. If you give them a choice between winning $10 or losing $5, people will choose, they would rather avoid losing $5 than they would prefer the chance to gain $10. Probably haven't explained that very well. But my point is that people fear loss more than they value gaining something. And so again, when it takes effort and change is uncertain, there's a kind of predisposition for people to kind of prefer to just stick with what they're already doing, because they fear losing time, energy, effort, as well as something that might be already working, or what already exists being kind of good enough in terms of, and it could get worse. Sometimes people just disagree with the change, right? So, you know, particularly if we've got a sort of top-down organization, I'm sure we've all had experiences where, you know, we've felt like change has been, come from somebody else, and it's been expected that we'll deliver on that change or respond to that change. And we just think, but that's a stupid idea. Or that it's going to make more work for us or something like that. So people just may disagree with either the reason for the change or that the change is needed. And then there's people have just different limited tolerances for change. So some people are more change adverse, and others like change. And so people are just different in that degree of tolerance as well. So we then have this chart, which we'll find on page 194, that goes through some different techniques that as managers or as people trying to affect change, so as change agents, we might use when we're trying to overcome those potential barriers for change. So in our 3-stage idea of, where we diagnose people's readiness for change, our second one is the techniques or approach to overcoming barriers to change. These are some of the options we can use. I'll let you dig into the details of this, but I'll just go through the sort of top level very quickly. And I would put these in order of preference, right? So with the ones that are at the top here, probably being more long-term effective, and you'll see what I mean when I get into this. So the first one is to educate and communicate with people. So this is a part of bringing them along with you, helping them understand why the change is wanted, needed, desired, whatever, what the benefits might be, and also potentially upskilling people in a way that helps them navigate and adapt to that change. The second one is actually through their participation. So this is bringing them in to being active, playing an active role in creating and doing the change. And so this enables people to feel a sense of agency in the change that is being made. Agency meaning that you have the, that you can personally do it, and that you have some say in what's actually happening. So involving people in the change process can be a really effective means of actually getting them on board and creating the change. And then also if they're responsible for the change outcome, so say if we're trying to improve some process in the organisation, and they're going to have to be the ones that then use whatever they create, actually involving them in the process of creating it is going to make it a lot easier for them to use it as well. We can use facilitation and support. So perhaps methods like coaching, helping them kind of see what their challenges are, and helping them work through what those challenges might be, helping them identify those challenges, supporting them with any challenges. So if there's particular things that come out that are legitimate reasons why they might be resisting the change, how might you either eliminate or reduce those legitimate challenges or things that they think are problems with that change that is being made, or if there's things that ways that the change is going to impact them, are there ways that you can support them so that that change is not going to impact on them, right? So, if we're working with somebody who, and we're just pluck an example from the air, we're bringing in a new computerized system for people who are not really into computers and not very good at computers, then maybe we need to give them additional support around how to use computers, so that then when it comes to actually using that computer-based system, they're not going to be as resistant to it, because they're going to feel that they have some sense of what we call efficacy, which is that they feel like they can do it rather than feeling like, I don't even know how to do this. We can use negotiation. So this is where we will sit down with people and kind of go, well, either what do you want in terms of being able to adapt to this change, or how might we come to some kind of agreement that is about that change. And this will normally happen at a group level. So, a union example might be a good way of thinking of this, where you have, say politicians might be trying to enact some kind of change. So let's say they're trying to enact some change in education, and then they have to deal and negotiate with the teachers union to negotiate how that change will happen, and what the teachers might get to either support or compensate them through that change process. But this can also happen interpersonally as well. If we're trying to get people on board, we might negotiate something with them that is in order for them to be more inclined to and interested in that change. We can also use manipulation and co-optation. So co-optation meaning that we kind of recruit them and or sort of shift the facts to kind of align with what people believe. Probably not a great long-term strategy, because it's more likely to reduce trust with whoever it is that you're trying to reduce the barriers to change with. And it may backfire, because they might kind of go, hang on a second, that's not actually true, or you're just manipulating things here in order to get the change that you want. And similarly, coercion, which is where we use threats or some kind of lure in order to coax people to agree to the change, which again, probably isn't a great long-term strategy, but in the short term, don't know, if you're trying to get your kid to eat their broccoli, you might coerce them with ice cream afterwards. So again, very big overview of some of these ways that we can think about overcoming barriers to change. You might think of some ways, things that you want to change either in your life, or you want to get other people to change in terms of the way that they do things. And which techniques do you think would be most effective for you? First of all, with yourself, how might you improve your ability to change by reducing your barriers to change? And then what might be some kinds of changes that you imagine you'll be having to deal with over your career, and what techniques might you use in those instances?